I should have known something was wrong when David booked the trip without asking me first. After 17 years of marriage, you develop instincts about your husband, the way he clears his throat before lying, how his left eye twitches when he's hiding something, the particular silence that fills a room when words have been carefully rehearsed. That Tuesday morning in March, when he slid the printed confirmation across our kitchen table with that practiced smile, every one of those instincts started screaming. But I was so desperate to believe we could be fixed, so terrified of becoming another divorce statistic at 42, that I ignored every single warning sign. If you've ever felt your marriage slipping through your fingers like sand, you know exactly the kind of panic I'm talking about. That suffocating fear that makes you agree to things you shouldn't, ignore things you can't unsee, and smile when your heart is breaking into 1,000 pieces. And if you know that feeling, go ahead and comment below where you're watching this from, because this story is for everyone who's ever fought for something that was already gone. Also, there are more stories like this in the description box below. Stories about women like us who refuse to stay silent. The inn was called Whispering Pines, tucked so deep into the Colorado mountains that my phone lost signal 40 minutes before we arrived. David had sold it to me as romantic, a remote getaway where we could reconnect without the distractions of our normal life. No kids, since ours were grown and scattered across different colleges. No work emails. No excuses. Just us, the way we used to be. Except we had never been to remote mountain lodges. In our early years, we'd been coffee shop people, movie theater people, crowded restaurant people. David had always claimed he hated isolation, hated quiet. So why now? Why this place that required 2 hours on increasingly narrow dirt roads, where the pine trees pressed so close they seemed to swallow the fading afternoon light? The lodge itself looked like something from a postcard that had been left in the rain too long, beautiful but deteriorating, with peeling blue paint and a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on one side. Only 3 other cars sat in the gravel lot, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a place this remote would have any guests at all in mid-March, when ski season was winding down but hiking season hadn't quite begun. David grabbed our bags before I could reach for mine, another uncharacteristic gesture that should have raised alarms. He'd stopped carrying things for me years ago, around the same time he'd stopped really looking at me when we talked, stopped reaching for my hand in public, stopped saying my name like it meant something. But that day, he was attentive in a way that felt rehearsed, like he was performing the role of devoted husband for an audience I couldn't see. The front office was small and cluttered, filled with the kind of mismatched furniture that suggested the owner had inherited the place rather than chosen it. Stuffed fish mounted on wood plaques lined one wall. A stone fireplace dominated another, cold and dark despite the chill in the air. And behind the desk stood a woman I'll never forget. She was maybe mid-50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a bun, so tight it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes. Those eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colorless, and they fixed on me the moment we walked through the door. Not on David, who was closer. Not on both of us equally. Just on me. Specifically on my left hand. I felt her gaze like a physical touch, heavy and searching, tracking the movement of my hand as I brushed hair from my face, as I adjusted my purse strap, as I absently twisted the wedding band I'd worn for 17 years. The platinum had worn thin in places, the small diamonds David had been so proud to afford back then now slightly loose in their settings. I'd been meaning to get it repaired but never found the time. "Welcome to Whispering Pines," she said, her voice rough like she didn't use it much. "I'm Eleanor. I own the place." David stepped forward with that smile he used with clients, the one that had sold hundreds of insurance policies over the years. "David Patterson. We have a reservation. Should be under my name." But Eleanor's eyes never left me. "And you are?" "Claire," I heard myself say, my voice smaller than I intended. "Claire Patterson." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or surprise, or something darker I couldn't name. Her fingers, gnarled with what looked like arthritis, moved across the old-fashioned ledger on her desk, but I could tell she wasn't really reading it. She already knew who we were. "Room 7, she said finally, producing an actual metal key, not a key card. "Top floor, end of the hall. It's our best room. Overlooks the valley. Perfect for a romantic getaway," David said, and the words sounded hollow even to my own ears, like dialogue from a movie no one believed. Eleanor handed him the key, but continued staring at me. How long have you two been married? The question caught me off guard. 17 years. This June. Long time. She said it flatly, without the warmth people usually infused into comments about lasting marriages. Then she turned to David. Ice machine's on the second floor, but it's been temperamental. If you need ice, better to come down here. I keep extra in the office freezer. We thanked her and headed toward the stairs, David's hand hovering near the small of my back without quite touching. As we climbed, I glanced back and saw Eleanor still standing behind that desk, still watching us, her pale eyes following our ascent with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Room 7 was bigger than I expected, with exposed wooden beams and a 4-poster bed that looked like it had been hand-carved sometime in the last century. Large windows offered a view of the valley David had promised, endless pine trees disappearing into shadows as the sun set behind the western peaks. It should have been beautiful. It should have felt like the fresh start we desperately needed. Instead, it felt like a stage set, like we were actors who'd forgotten our lines. David set down our bags and immediately checked his watch, a gesture so automatic I almost didn't notice it. But I did notice, and I noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes darted to the window and then away, the way his whole body seemed coiled with tension he was trying to hide. You okay? I asked. Just tired from the drive? Long way up that mountain. He kissed my forehead, another gesture from our early years that felt wrong in its sudden reappearance. I'm going to grab some ice. Maybe we can make drinks, try to relax. We didn't drink much anymore. Hadn't in years. But I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. He left, and I stood at the window watching darkness swallow the valley, trying to remember when exactly I'd stopped knowing my own husband. Was it gradual or sudden? Had there been a moment I could point to, or had we just slowly drifted until we were strangers sharing a house, a bed, a last name that felt increasingly like a lie? I don't know how long I stood there before I realized he'd been gone too long. 5 minutes to get ice, maybe 10 if the machine really was temperamental. But 20 minutes, 30, something was wrong. I opened our door and stepped into the hallway, and that's when I heard it, voices drifting up from the floor below. David's voice, tight with stress, and Eleanor's, calm and measured, saying something I couldn't quite make out. I crept to the stairs and descended slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The office door was partially open, golden light spilling into the dim hallway. I pressed myself against the wall and listened. She doesn't know, David was saying. I swear to God, she has no idea. They never do. Eleanor's voice carried a weight of experience, of having seen this before. Until they do. And then what, David? What happens when she figures it out? Every muscle in my body had gone rigid. What didn't I know? What was I supposed to figure out? I should have burst through that door. Should have demanded answers. But fear held me frozen. Fear and the terrible certainty that whatever truth waited on the other side of that conversation would destroy everything I had left. I don't know how I made it back to our room without collapsing. My legs felt disconnected from my body as I climbed those stairs, each step requiring conscious thought, deliberate effort. By the time I closed the door behind me, my hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together to make them stop. I stood in the center of that carefully decorated room with its rustic charm and romantic lighting, and felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Asterisk, she doesn't know. I swear to God, she has no idea. Asterisk. What didn't I know? The question circled my mind like a vulture, picking at every insecurity I'd ever had about our marriage, about David, about myself. Was he having an affair? Had he been having affairs? Was that why he'd suggested couples therapy 6 months ago, not to save us, but to assuage his guilt? Was that why our sex life had dwindled to almost nothing, why he worked late so often, why he'd started going to the gym at 5 in the morning when he'd never been a morning person? Or was it something worse? I thought about the life insurance policies he sold for a living, about how much he knew about death benefits and beneficiaries. I thought about how he'd insisted on updating our wills last year, how he'd encouraged me to increase my life insurance coverage. We're getting older, Claire. We need to be responsible. My breath came faster, shallower. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to slow my racing heart. This was paranoia, wasn't it? The kind of spiral women fall into when their marriages are dying and they start seeing threats everywhere, inventing conspiracies because the simple truth, that love just ends sometimes, is too boring, too ordinary to accept. Except David's voice had been afraid, and Eleanor had spoken with the weariness of someone who'd given the speech before. Asterisk, they never do. Until they do, asterisk. I was still standing there, trapped between panic and disbelief, when the door opened and David walked in. No ice. He wasn't carrying anything at all. "They're out," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Eleanor said the delivery doesn't come until Friday." It was Tuesday. What kind of lodge ran out of ice on a Tuesday? "That's okay," I heard myself say, my voice steady despite everything churning inside me. "We don't really need it." He nodded, relieved, and started unpacking his bag with exaggerated focus. I watched him fold and refold a shirt, saw the tremor in his hands he was trying to hide. Whatever was happening, he was scared too. Somehow that made it worse. That night we lay in bed with 3 feet of space between us, both pretending to sleep while the old lodge settled and creaked around us. I kept thinking about Eleanor's colorless eyes, the way they tracked my wedding ring like it was evidence in a crime she was still piecing together. I kept hearing David's voice. "She has no idea. If you've ever spent a night lying next to someone you suddenly realize you don't know at all, you understand the special kind of loneliness I felt. It's worse than being alone. It's being alone while someone breathes beside you, while their familiar shape takes up space in your peripheral vision, while the life you built together crumbles in silence. That feeling, it's what drives women to do things they never thought they'd do. And maybe some of you watching know exactly what I'm talking about. Drop a comment if you've ever felt that kind of desperate not knowing. And if you need more stories about women who found their way through the darkness, check the description box below. Morning came gray and cold, fog pressing against the windows like it was trying to get in. David suggested breakfast in the lodge's dining room, another uncharacteristic choice since he usually preferred to skip breakfast entirely. But I agreed because I needed to see Eleanor again, needed to watch her face when she looked at us, needed some clue to make sense of the dread pooling in my stomach. The dining room held only 2 other guests, an elderly couple who ate in complete silence, not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that comes from decades together. I envied them that ease even as I feared becoming them, trapped in a marriage where words had become irrelevant. Eleanor appeared with coffee, and once again her eyes went straight to my hands. This time I noticed her gaze didn't just linger on my wedding ring. It moved to my right hand too, to the small scar on my index finger from a cooking accident years ago, to the freckles across my knuckles, like she was memorizing every detail. "Sleep well?" she asked, pouring my coffee first. "Yes, thank you." The lie came easily after years of practice. "And you?" She turned to David, but there was something different in her expression now. Something almost accusing. "Fine. Great, actually." He wrapped both hands around his mug like he needed the warmth. "Claire and I were thinking about hiking the Ridge Trail today. You mentioned it's beautiful this time of year." I hadn't heard him mention any trail. We hadn't discussed hiking at all. "Ridge Trail's closed," Eleanor said flatly. "Mudslide took out part of the path last week. Won't be safe until late April." "Oh." David's disappointment seemed genuine. "What would you suggest instead?" "There's a trail down by the creek. Easy walk, very private. Hardly anyone knows about it." She looked at me as she said this last part, like she was issuing a warning disguised as a recommendation. After breakfast, David said he needed to make some work calls, despite having claimed this trip was about disconnecting, and headed back to our room. I told him I wanted to explore the lodge, maybe find a book in the small library Eleanor had mentioned. But what I really wanted was another chance to talk to Eleanor alone. I found her in the office, bent over that old ledger, writing something in careful, precise handwriting. When I knocked on the door frame, she looked up without surprise, as if she'd been expecting me. "Claire." Not Mrs. Patterson. Just my first name, familiar in a way that felt presumptuous. "I was wondering if you had any recommendations for the area. David mentioned you'd lived here a long time." "All my life." She set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, studying me with those pale, penetrating eyes. "Inherited this place from my mother, and she inherited it from hers. 4 generations of women running Whispering Pines. That's impressive. Rare these days. Lots of things are rare these days. Like marriages that last 17 years. She said it without warmth, almost like a challenge. The air in the small office felt suddenly thick, harder to breathe. I glanced at the door, making sure it was still open, making sure I could leave if I needed to. "I should get back," I said, but my feet didn't move. "He seems nervous," Eleanor said. "Your husband. Very nervous for a man on a romantic getaway." My heart stuttered. "I think he's just stressed from work." "Maybe." She stood slowly, her joints creaking with the effort, and moved around the desk toward me. Not threatening, exactly, but deliberate. Purposeful. "Can I ask you something, Claire?" I should have said no. Should have walked out right then. But instead I nodded. "That ring you're wearing. How long have you had it?" My hand moved instinctively to cover my wedding band. "Since we got married. 17 years, like I said. And you've worn it every day? Never taken it off?" "Never." "Why would I?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. A decision being made. "David left earlier," she said. "Told me he needed to get ice. But the ice machine isn't broken, and the office freezer is always well stocked. He just wanted an excuse to talk to me alone." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "Talk to you about what?" "I can't tell you that." She moved closer, and I could smell lavender and something medicinal, like the liniment my grandmother used to rub on sore joints. "But I can tell you this. You need to be very careful. And you need to start paying attention to things that don't make sense." "What things? What are you talking about?" She glanced past me, out toward the hallway, as if checking to make sure we were alone. Then she lowered her voice. "How long have you known him, Claire? Really known him?" Before I could answer, footsteps echoed in the hall. Eleanor's entire demeanor changed instantly, her face smoothing into professional hospitality as David appeared in the doorway. "There you are," he said to me, his smile tight. "I was looking for you. Just chatting with Eleanor about local trails." My voice sounded normal. I had no idea how I managed that. "Actually," Eleanor said, moving back behind her desk, "I was just telling your wife about the property history. How my grandmother used to run this place back in the 40s. Lots of stories in these old walls." David's jaw tightened. "I bet. Well, Claire, ready to head back up? I thought we could make plans for dinner." I nodded and let him guide me out, his hand on my elbow like I might run if he didn't hold on. As we walked away, I glanced back and saw Eleanor still standing there, watching us with an expression I finally recognized. Pity. That's when I knew for certain, whatever was happening, whatever David and Eleanor had discussed, I was in danger. Not the dramatic, movie kind of danger I could easily identify and escape. Something more insidious. Something that had been hiding in plain sight for so long I'd stopped seeing it. That night, while David showered, I went through his phone. I'd never done that before. Not once in 17 years. But fear makes you do things shame would normally prevent. His messages were mostly work-related, boring, benign. Nothing suspicious. Nothing concrete. But in his email, buried in a folder labeled insurance claims, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a forwarded thread about a woman named Jennifer Marsh. She died 6 months ago at a remote lodge in Montana. The emails discussed her life insurance policy, $500,000, and the complications around paying the claim because her death had been ruled suspicious. Possible foul play, though nothing was ever proven. Her husband had been with her at the lodge. Her husband, who'd booked the trip without asking her first. Her husband, who'd insisted they needed the isolation to work on their marriage. Her husband, whose name was David. I don't remember how I got back to our room. One moment I was standing in the hallway outside the bathroom, David's phone clutched in my trembling hands, staring at a dead woman's name on a glowing screen. The next moment I was sitting on the edge of our bed, the phone carefully returned to exactly where I'd found it, my mind racing through possibilities I couldn't fully accept but couldn't ignore. Jennifer Marsh. The name meant nothing to me. I'd never heard David mention her, never seen her in photos, never had any reason to suspect my husband had been married before. But there it was in black and white, insurance documents, death certificates, claim disputes. A whole life, and death I knew nothing about. The shower shut off. I heard David humming, actually humming, some tuneless melody that made my skin crawl. He emerged moments later wrapped in a towel, his hair dripping, looking younger somehow. Lighter. Like a weight had been lifted rather than added. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my expression. You look pale. Just a headache. The altitude, maybe. He nodded, bought it completely, and started getting dressed. I watched him from what felt like a great distance, studying this man I'd slept beside for 17 years like he was a stranger. Had I ever really known him? Or had I just known the version of himself he'd chosen to show me? That question. It's the one that haunts women like us, isn't it? When you discover the person you loved was partially a performance, you start wondering which parts were real. The morning coffees he made, the way he cried at our son's graduation, the quiet Sunday afternoons reading newspapers side by side. Were any of those moments genuine, or had I been living in a relationship with a ghost, a carefully constructed facade designed to hide something darker? If you've ever questioned your entire history with someone, if you've ever felt that particular kind of vertigo that comes from realizing your whole life might be built on lies, you're not alone. Comment below if you understand that feeling. And remember, there are more stories like this one in the description below. Stories about women who found their truth, no matter how painful. That night, I couldn't eat the dinner David had picked up from the town 40 minutes down the mountain. I pushed food around my plate while he talked about hiking tomorrow, about how good this trip was for us, about how we just needed to get back to basics. Every word felt like a nail in a coffin I was only beginning to see. I waited until he fell asleep, his breathing deep and even, before I slipped out of bed and crept downstairs. The lodge was silent except for the settling of old wood and the distant hoot of an owl outside. A single lamp burned in the office, and I found Eleanor exactly where I'd hoped, sitting in her chair, reading a paperback with yellowed pages. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and I saw no surprise in her eyes. She'd been waiting for me. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He was married before. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. To a woman named Jennifer Marsh. She died at a lodge in Montana. 6 months ago. Eleanor set down her book slowly, carefully marking her place. "Sit down, Claire." I sank into the chair across from her desk, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. The office felt smaller at night, the shadows longer, the mounted fish on the walls watching with their glassy dead eyes. "How did you know?" I asked. "Know what specifically?" "That something was wrong. You knew from the moment we walked in. You kept staring at my ring, asking questions. You told me to be careful." "How did you know?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her gnarled fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the desk. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of a story she told before but never gotten used to telling. "Jennifer Marsh stayed here," she said. "Not at this lodge. At my sister's place, Pine Ridge Inn, about 2 hours north. But my sister and I, we talk. We share information about guests, especially ones that set off alarm bells. Jennifer set off every alarm my sister had." My hands gripped the armrests of a chair. "What happened to her?" "Officially, accidental fall. She went hiking alone early one morning, slipped on wet rocks near a waterfall, hit her head. Her husband, David Marsh, he called himself then, found her hours later. Devastated by all accounts. The local sheriff investigated, but there wasn't enough evidence to call it anything but a tragic accident. But your sister didn't believe it. My sister noticed things, like how David had suggested that specific hike, even though the trail was known to be dangerous after rain. Like how he'd been very insistent Jennifer go alone, said he wasn't feeling well. Like how he'd updated her life insurance policy just 2 months before. Like how Jennifer had started asking questions the night before, questions about her husband's past, about whether my sister had noticed anything strange. The room spun around me. She suspected him. I think she figured it out too late. And I think David has done this before. Eleanor leaned forward, her pale eyes boring into mine. After Jennifer died, my sister started digging. She contacted other remote lodges, other innkeepers in the network we're part of. 3 other women, Claire. 3 other women who died at remote lodges while on marriage-saving trips with men named David. Different last names each time, but the same pattern. Same insurance policy updates. Same suspicious circumstances. Same devastated widower who walked away rich and free. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room had turned to concrete, filling my lungs with weight I couldn't expel. Why didn't she go to the police? She did. They said it was all circumstantial. Different jurisdictions, different names, No physical evidence linking any of the deaths. Serial killers are supposed to have patterns that law enforcement can track, but David's smart. He spaces them out, changes his identity, chooses locations carefully, and he always makes sure it looks like an accident. So why tell me, if the police won't do anything? Because you deserve to know what you're dealing with. Eleanor's voice turned fierce. And because I think we can stop him. But you have to be smart about it, Claire. Smarter than the others were. I thought about Jennifer Marsh, about 3 other nameless women who'd probably felt exactly what I was feeling right now, the terror, the disbelief, the desperate hope that maybe this was all a misunderstanding. They'd probably told themselves their husbands wouldn't really hurt them, that there had to be another explanation. That love, even fading love, meant something. They'd been wrong. What do I do? My voice cracked on the words. Eleanor pulled out a folder from her desk drawer, thick, worn, filled with papers I recognized as research. Newspaper clippings about accidental deaths. Printed emails. Photos of women I'd never met but whose faces would haunt me forever. First, you need to understand who you're married to. His real name is Daniel Crawford. He grew up in Ohio, married his high school sweetheart when he was 22. She died in a house fire 3 years later. Insurance paid out $200,000. She spread photos across the desk, and I saw him. Younger, different hair, different style, but unmistakably David. Daniel, whatever his real name was. Then he became David Morrison, married a woman named Stephanie. She drowned in their pool while he was supposedly at work. $500,000. Then David Patterson, that's the name you know, married you. But before you, there was Sarah Chun, who died from a fall while camping. Before her, Jessica Williams, who died in a car accident on a mountain road. And then Jennifer Marsh. But I'm still alive, I whispered. We've been married 17 years. Why wait so long? Because you're different. Eleanor gathered the photos back into the folder. The others were short marriages, 2 years, 3 at most. You've been together almost 2 decades. You have grown children. You have a life people would notice disappearing. I think he actually cared about you, Claire, in whatever broken way he's capable of caring. But something changed recently, didn't it? Something made him decide it was time. I thought about the last 6 months, how distant David had become, how he'd started staying late at work more often, how our physical intimacy had dwindled to nothing. And I remembered something else. My parents had died in a car accident last year. They'd left me their house, their savings, everything. Over $1 million total. My inheritance, I said numbly. Eleanor nodded. I'd bet everything I own that he updated your life insurance policy right around the same time. She was right. He had. For our future, he'd said. For security. For his next fresh start. I stood on shaking legs and moved to the window, staring out at the dark shapes of pine trees against a darker sky. Somewhere out there, David slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams men like him have. Did he feel guilt? Remorse? Or was I just another problem to solve, another policy to cash in? There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. Something you need to see. She pulled out her phone and showed me a text exchange with her sister. Messages about me, about our reservation, about how David had specifically requested the remote location, the room with the best view, the hiking trails. How he'd asked detailed questions about the terrain, the safety features, the places where someone might slip and fall. He's planning it for tomorrow, Eleanor said. The creek trail I mentioned. It's more dangerous than I made it sound. There are places where the bank crumbles, where the water runs fast and deep over rocks. My sister's been researching his pattern, and he always does it on the 2nd or 3rd day. Gives just enough time to establish the narrative of a couple working on their marriage, creates witnesses who can testify about how attentive and loving he seemed. I turned to face her, and I saw my reflection in the dark window glass, a ghost of myself, pale and terrified but somehow still standing. What do I do? You pretend everything is normal. You go on that hike tomorrow, and you let him try. My heart stopped. What? You need evidence, Claire. Something concrete that will make the police listen, that will connect all these deaths to one man. My sister and we've been documenting everything, but it's not enough. We need him caught in the act. You want me to let him try to kill me? I want you to be prepared when he tries. Eleanor stood and moved to a locked cabinet behind her desk. She opened it and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When she unwrapped it, I saw a small GPS tracker and what looked like a button camera. "You'll wear these. I'll be tracking your every move. The moment he makes his move, I'll have evidence, and I'll alert the sheriff's deputy who's been helping us. He'll be stationed nearby. You won't be alone out there." This is insane. But even as I said it, I knew I was going to do it. Because what other choice did I have? Run. He'd find me eventually, and next time I wouldn't see it coming. Go to the police with the circumstantial evidence Eleanor had gathered? They'd already dismissed my husband, all of my husbands, multiple times. No. If I wanted to survive this, if I wanted justice for Jennifer and Sarah and Jessica and Stephanie and all the others, I had to be brave in a way I'd never been before. I had to become bait. Morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. I lay in bed listening to David's breathing and wondering if this would be the last sunrise I'd ever see. The GPS tracker sat heavy in my jacket pocket. Eleanor had shown me how to activate it with a double press, how the signal would beam my exact location to both her and Deputy Morrison, who was apparently the only law enforcement officer in 3 counties who believed women when they said something was wrong. The button camera was disguised as a zipper pull on my jacket, its lens tiny but powerful enough to capture whatever happened in the woods. If I survived this, I'd have proof. If I didn't, at least someone would know the truth. David woke with unusual energy, practically bouncing out of bed with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen from him in years. "Beautiful day for a hike," he said, pulling back the curtains to reveal a crystalline morning, the kind of perfect mountain weather that felt like a cosmic joke, given what was coming. We ate breakfast in the dining room, and I forced myself to chew and swallow while Eleanor poured coffee with steady hands and exchanged the briefest glance with me, a silent question, and my almost imperceptible nod of answer. The elderly couple from before sat at their table again, and I found myself memorizing their faces, these people who might be the last normal thing I'd see. "Ready for our adventure?" David asked, draining his coffee. Adventure. That's what he called it. Like we were heading off on some romantic excursion instead of the ending he'd been planning since the moment he'd booked this trip. The creek trail started just beyond the lodge property, a narrow path that wound through dense pine forest before opening onto a rocky ravine where water rushed over smooth stones worn by decades of current. David led the way, and I followed, trying to memorize every detail in case I needed to run. The fallen log 20 yards in, the distinctive pine with a lightning scar on its trunk, the place where the path forked and the right branch led back toward the lodge. If you've ever walked toward your own potential death with your eyes wide open, you know the strange clarity that comes with it. Everything becomes sharper, the smell of pine sap, the bird calls echoing through the trees, the sound of your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. I wasn't numb. I wasn't resigned. I was more present than I'd been in years, maybe in my entire life. And I was angry. Not the hot, explosive anger of a moment. The cold, calculated fury of a woman who'd been lied to, manipulated, treated as disposable. David had stolen 17 years of my life, had slept beside me, and made love to me and raised children with me, all while planning how to eventually cash me in like a winning lottery ticket. Jennifer and the others hadn't had the chance to fight back. But I did. I was going to make sure he paid for all of us. "It's beautiful here," David said, stopping at a point where the trail ran along the ravine's edge. Below us, water crashed over rocks in a white fury. The bank crumbled at our feet, unstable earth, and loose stones that would give way under the slightest pressure. Perfect spot for an accident. "It is," I agreed, staying carefully out of arm's reach. "Very romantic." He turned to me then, and something in his expression shifted. The mask of the concerned husband slipped just slightly, and I saw calculation underneath. "I'm glad we came here, Claire. I know things have been difficult between us." "Have they?" "You know they have. We've been drifting apart for months. Maybe longer." He moved closer, and I felt every muscle in my body tense. "But I want you to know, whatever happens, I did care about you. More than the others." The others. He'd said it out loud, admitted it without meaning to, and I saw the moment he realized his mistake. His eyes widened slightly, and I watched him try to recalculate, to figure out if I'd caught his slip. I had. "What others, David?" I kept my voice level, curious but not accusatory. Still playing the trusting wife even as my hand moved to my pocket, double-pressing the GPS button that would signal Eleanor. I met other relationships. Before we met, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're different from anyone I've been with before. Different how? Stronger. Smarter. He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn for years. That's why I waited. That's why I tried to make it work. Waited for what? His smile faded completely. You know. The words hung between us like a blade. This was it, the moment where pretense died and truth emerged, raw and ugly. The moment I'd been dreading and preparing for all night. Jennifer Marsh, I said quietly. His face went white, then red, then something worse. Empty, like a mask had finally been removed, and there was nothing human underneath. How do you? Eleanor told me. Her sister owned the lodge where Jennifer died. And Stephanie, and Sarah, and Jessica, and the woman before me that you've been so careful about. How many, David? Or should I call you Daniel? How many women have you killed? He lunged faster than I expected, but I was ready. I threw myself backward, away from the ravine's edge, and stumbled on the loose rocks. His hands caught my jacket, pulling me toward him, toward the crumbling bank and the water below that would have explained everything away. You stupid bitch, he snarled, and there it was, the real man I'd married, finally visible after 17 years of performance. You couldn't just let it happen. You had to go digging, asking questions, ruining everything. Like Jennifer did? I clawed at his hands, fighting for purchase on the unstable ground. Like all of them did when they figured out what you were. They were weak, trusting. You were supposed to be too. He shoved me harder toward the edge, and I felt rocks giving way beneath my feet, heard them tumble into the rushing water below. I gave you 17 good years, Claire. That's more than I gave any of the others. You should be grateful. Grateful. The laugh that burst from me was half hysterical, half furious. You want me to be grateful that it took you almost 2 decades to decide my life insurance was worth more than my actual life? Something shifted in his expression, surprise that I understood, followed by cold acceptance. The inheritance sped things up. Your parents' money, the house, everything. Add that to the life insurance and you'd be set up for another identity, another fresh start, another woman to eventually murder. Don't be dramatic. It's just business. He said it so casually, like he was discussing investment strategies instead of serial murder. The marriages are real while they last. I'm not a monster, Claire. I actually do care. But nothing lasts forever, and when it's time to move on, you kill them. I free us both from something that stopped working. His grip tightened on my jacket, pulling me closer to the edge. Rocks continued tumbling into the ravine, the sound lost in the roar of water. But you had to ruin it. You had to talk to Eleanor to figure things out. Now it's going to look suspicious instead of accidental. You're right about that. Eleanor's voice cut through the morning air like a gunshot. David's head whipped around, and I saw genuine shock cross his face as Eleanor emerged from the tree line, Deputy Morrison right behind her with his weapon drawn. The button camera had captured everything, his confession, his attack, all of it recorded in high definition. Let her go, Mr. Crawford, the deputy said, using David's real name. Step away from the edge. For a moment, I thought David might jump, might pull me with him into the water rather than face what was coming. His fingers dug into my jacket so hard I felt bruises forming. But then he released me with a shove that sent me sprawling onto solid ground and raised his hands in surrender. This is insane, he said, the mask slamming back into place so fast it was almost impressive. Claire, tell them this is a misunderstanding. We were just hiking. She slipped. I was trying to help. I recorded everything, I said, pushing myself to my feet on shaking legs. Your confession, your admission about the others, all of it. I watched the realization hit him, the understanding that he'd finally, fatally miscalculated. That he'd underestimated one woman too many, and that mistake would be his last. Deputy Morrison moved forward with handcuffs, reading rights in a steady voice while David's face cycled through emotions too fast to track: rage, disbelief, calculation, defeat. Eleanor wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, even though I wasn't cold, just shaking so hard my teeth chattered. You did it, she murmured. You were so brave. Brave felt like the wrong word for what I'd done. Desperate, maybe. Determined. Furious enough to risk everything for the chance to stop him. But as they led Daniel, whoever he really was, away in handcuffs, I felt something crack open in my chest that had been sealed shut for longer than I could remember. Relief. And rage. And grief for 17 years spent loving a lie. The investigation took months. They exhumed bodies, tracked down records, interviewed witnesses from 5 different states. In the end, they confirmed 6 murders spanning nearly 3 decades, including David's first wife, the one who died in the house fire. The insurance fraud alone was staggering. The body count was worse. I testified at his trial, wearing the same jacket I'd worn that day in the woods, the one with the button camera that had captured his confession. I looked him in the eye as I recounted every detail, every lie, every moment when I should have seen what he was but chose to believe in love instead. He showed no remorse. Even at sentencing, when the judge handed down 6 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, David's face remained blank. Like we were all just business transactions that had gone bad, nothing personal, nothing worth feeling guilt over. But I felt everything. 4 months after, I dreamed about the ravine, about his hands on my jacket, about the sound of rocks tumbling into water. I dreamed about Jennifer and the others, about how close I'd come to joining them as just another tragic accident, another dead wife, another case file gathering dust. Therapy helped. Time helped more. And Eleanor became an unlikely friend, this woman who'd recognized danger when I was still blind to it, who'd risked everything to save a stranger. How did you know for sure? I asked her once, months after the trial, sitting in her office where this had all begun. From the moment we walked in, you knew. But how? She smiled sadly and held up her own left hand, showing me a ring I'd never noticed before, thin gold band, worn smooth, no stones. Because 30 years ago I was you. Different man, different name, but the same con. He brought me to a lodge, just like this one, bought life insurance, planned the perfect accident. The only difference was I got lucky. A witness saw him push me off a hiking trail, and that witness happened to be an off-duty state trooper. You never told me. Didn't seem relevant until it was. But when you 2 walked in, and I saw the way he looked at you, or rather, didn't look at you, not really, and the way you touched your ring like it was a talisman that could protect you, I recognized the pattern. I've been watching for it ever since, trying to save the women I couldn't save back then. How many have you warned? You're the first who listened. She refilled our coffee cups, her arthritic hands steady with practice. The others thought I was paranoid, or meddling, or they love their husbands too much to believe the truth. You were different. You were ready to see. Maybe that was the saddest part. That being ready to see the worst in someone you loved was what saved your life. I sold the house David and I had shared, donated most of the furniture to charity, kept only what belonged to me before the marriage. The life insurance money I never got. They voided the policies once the fraud was uncovered, but my parents' inheritance remained, and it was enough. Enough to start over. Enough to breathe. My children struggled with it all. How do you tell your kids that their father is a serial killer, that their entire childhood was built on lies and death? My daughter stopped speaking to me for 6 months, convinced I must have known something, must have been complicit somehow. My son threw himself into therapy and emerged quieter, older, permanently changed by the knowledge that evil doesn't always look like evil. But we survived. All of us. And that matters more than people realize. It's been 2 years now since that morning in the woods. 2 years since I walked toward my own death and came back different. Not broken, but fundamentally rearranged, like I'd been taken apart and put back together with some pieces in new places. I don't date. Maybe I never will again. How do you trust your judgment about people when you spent 17 years sleeping next to a murderer and never knew? How do you open your heart when the last person you opened it to was actively planning your funeral? But I'm alive. And Jennifer Marsh, Stephanie Morrison, Sarah Chen, Jessica Williams, and the others aren't. That fact sits with me every day. The random chance that I ended up at Eleanor's lodge instead of someone else's, that she recognized the pattern, that I was willing to believe the impossible truth. Survivor's guilt, my therapist calls it. I call it bearing witness. Someone has to remember those women. Someone has to say their names. Someone has to make sure their deaths weren't forgotten in the face of one man's monstrous narcissism. So I'm saying them now to all of you watching. Jennifer Marsh, Stephanie Morrison, Sarah Chun, Jessica Williams, Amanda Crawford, David's first wife, the one who started it all. They were daughters and sisters and friends. They were women with dreams and futures and lives that mattered. They deserved better than becoming line items on insurance claims, cautionary tales, cold cases. They deserved to be believed when they started asking questions. They deserve people who would risk something to save them. If you're watching this and something doesn't feel right in your relationship, if there are questions your partner won't answer, if there are parts of their past that don't make sense, if your instincts are screaming even as your heart wants to trust, please listen to those instincts. Please ask the hard questions. Please don't let love blind you to danger. And if someone like Eleanor appears in your life, someone who sees what you can't and tries to warn you, please don't dismiss them as paranoid or meddling. Please consider that they might be the only thing standing between you and a tragedy that could have been prevented. I think about that moment on the ravine edge every day. The moment when David said, "I gave you 17 good years, Claire. You should be grateful. Like my life was a gift he generously allowed me to keep until it became inconvenient. But here's what I learned. Your life is never someone else's gift to give or take. It belongs to you. And the moment someone treats it as disposable, as less valuable than money or convenience or their own twisted needs, that's when you fight. That's when you become dangerous in return. Not violent, not cruel, just absolutely unwilling to be erased. I survived because I refused to be another victim in David's long con. I survived because Eleanor refused to let another woman die on her watch. I survived because sometimes, when you're standing on the edge of the abyss staring into darkness, you find something fierce inside yourself you didn't know was there. Something that says, not me, not today, not ever again. To everyone who's made it to the end of a story, thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness with me. And if any of this resonated with you, if you experienced anything similar or know someone who has, please share this video. Please check the description box below for resources on recognizing dangerous patterns in relationships, for support networks for survivors, and for more stories like mine, stories about women who refuse to stay silent. Comment below where you're watching from, and tell me, has anyone ever warned you about something you didn't want to see? Did you listen? Or did you, like me, have to walk all the way to the edge before you finally opened your eyes? We survive by sharing our truths, by refusing to let shame or fear keep us quiet, by standing up and saying, "This happened to me, and I'm still here, and I won't let it happen to anyone else if I can help it." My name is Claire Patterson. I was married to a serial killer for 17 years and didn't know it. But I'm alive to tell you about it. And that, in the end, is the only revenge that really matters. Thank you for watching. Remember to check the description box for more stories of survival, strength, and women who refuse to be silenced. And if you're in danger right now, if something in your relationship feels wrong, please reach out. Please ask for help. Please trust that you deserve better than being someone's eventual victim. You deserve to survive. We all do.